This program brought to you by State Bank of India.
Hello and welcome to How's That? 14 teams entered the World Cup 2011. Now it's down to the 4 that will compete in the semi-finals. 3 subcontinent teams, the third one today being Sri Lanka, who downed England by 10 wickets and 10 overs to spare. Sri Lanka at the Premadasa Stadium in Colombo delighted the fans, and they have romped home. The semi-finals are set. To analyze today's action as well as the semi-finals coming up here in Doordarshan Sports, we have our expert panel of eminent sports journalist Raja Raman as well as former cricketer Rajendra Amarnath. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we talk about the details of this match, Mr. Raman, we talked a little bit about the minnows and the format a little earlier with the league, 7 teams on each side. We have the final 4 now. What are your thoughts on the 4 that have made it to the semi-finals?
I think barring New Zealand, you would have expected all 3 to get in there. You would have expected Australia to be the 4th side, not so much South Africa, but Australia. Unfortunately, they lost to India. Unfortunately for them, they lost to India. They had lost to Pakistan, and therefore there was this clash with India. But I think the 4 best sides in the tournament are left, and good luck to all 4 of them.
Indeed. Mr. Amarnath, the Kiwis, 4 best sides. You've seen the rock and roll World Cup that the Kiwis have had. Some very ordinary matches, a complete slaughter by Australia, and then some creditable performances thanks to Ross Taylor against the Pakistanis. Their place in the final 4, what are your thoughts?
Well, if you talk about New Zealand, they have always been a dark horse. They have been coming out with performance which nobody expected them to come out with, and especially against South Africa. South Africa was tipped to be in the semi-finals, but I think the conditions favored New Zealand more than the South Africans, because at times when you're overconfident, complacency sets in, and that could have been one of the reasons that South Africa, that was not a big task for them to get to the target, but having lost a couple of wickets earlier on, and then quite a few misunderstandings in the middle overs, and then spinners played a very prominent role, and that was the reason that the South Africans, despite being in a very good position, just couldn't make it.
Well, indeed, you have the final 4, but something seems to be wrong. South Africa and Australia, looking to be the most complete teams in the tournament, do not have a place in the final 4. South Africa, for the 7th time consecutively, they were talking about that choker word that they don't want associated with this team. Unfortunately, it'll take 4 more years for the Proteas to shed this term. Let's get to the match today. Premadasa Stadium in Colombo, the 4th quarter-final. England versus Sri Lanka. Andy Strauss won the toss, decided to go into bat. Mr. Raman, the first hour or so of play, for the 4th consecutive match, we saw a little bit of tentative play, the aggression not showing when it came to playoffs, perhaps a little bit of pressure on the captains that right now every game matters. 19 balls, Andy Strauss lasted 5 runs, not the start that England were hoping for.
Definitely, Mihir. Andrew Strauss would have liked to play a long innings, play the 50 overs. But unfortunately for him, he came up against some very crafty bowling. Not just Lasith Malinga at one end, but Tilkaratne Dilshan's off spin at the other. I think Sri Lanka surprised him there. He would have expected Ajanta Mendes to be bowling if a spinner were bowling, or a Rangana Herat to be bowling. But Dilshan with the new ball, I think he surprised him. But I think England was overall looking to keep wickets for the end, and they put off things too late. After 30 overs was when they started scoring runs at a fast clip. They needed someone like Ian Morgan to come in, Matt Pryor to come in and score a few runs. But 220 odd was not going to be very difficult for Sri Lanka to chase on their home turf.
Indeed. You know, and we talked a little bit about Tilakaratne Dilshan. We know he got a century when Sri Lanka came out to bat. But that spell, 6 overs, 1 maiden, 1 for 25, and that wicket that he got of Andy Strauss after bogging him down for several deliveries. Dilshan, well, we know his batting is stupendous, but as a bowler to another threat for Sri Lanka going ahead, Mr. Amarnath?
He hasn't been bowling too much lately, but he has ability. Definitely he has the ability to bowl. and especially when you're bowling against a left-hand batsman and you're an off-spinner and the wicket helping you, and at the same time the batsman not expecting an off-spinner to operate early on in the innings, that could have baffled him a bit. And then Strauss definitely loves to play a long inning. He likes to take a lot of time in the middle, but that didn't help the cause of the English team, because if you have the top players having a strike rate about 70s or 80s, it doesn't help your cause, because what you need in those first 15 overs is strike rate should be over 100. At least of one of the two batsmen should strike that. But it didn't happen for England, and that's the reason that they were always lagging behind the run rate. And once you try and put a foot on the accelerator, it doesn't help your cause, especially when you're dealing crafty spinners like Muralidharan, Dilshan and Mendes. It is never an easy task.
Well, indeed, you know, what's really interesting about this World Cup is the strategy of power plays. The first 10 overs, mandatory power plays, but then the bowling team has to pick a 5-over spell for the power play, and the batting team too. We saw that in the tournament so far, successful teams are the ones who have used this power play well. Mr. Raman, your thought on this phenomenon and how some of the teams have reacted, including the two teams today in power play?
Teams have preferred to delay power play, the batting power play, and that's the big one. Teams have not scored big, barring India, which have really scored at a fast clip, Sehwag and Sachin Tendulkar. Overall, this has been a slow World Cup for the openers, because teams have wanted to conserve wickets for the batting power play, but they've all struggled. They're not sure whether they should go for power play in the 35th over when the ball is changed and it's fairly hard, or whether they should wait till the 42nd or 43rd over to claim power play. Teams have been perplexed, and when set batsmen are at the crease, that's when power play should be taken. Instead, we've seen power play engineer the loss of a lot of wickets, and I think it's confused a lot of teams in this World Cup.
Indeed, and you saw when England actually came out to bowl, they took their bowling power play very late, because we saw what the Sri Lankan openers did. Interestingly, the find of the English team, some players have been consistent, inconsistent, some have scored, you could give them 5, 6, 7 on 10, but one player, Mr. Amarnath, a batsman who deserves either a 9 or a 10 on 10, Jonathan Trott. 5th consecutive 50. He's played just 24 ODIs. In his first 8 innings, he had 6 50s. Extremely consistent, despite the pressure, despite the odds. Again playing a stupendous innings today, scoring 80 plus, surviving till the end. Your thoughts on this batsman?
Well, I think he did a marvelous job for England. What was required from the other end was something to give him a support, which unfortunately didn't come. And another thing what I found in English team is they were never comfortable against the spinners, and that could be one of the reasons that the big partnership didn't come their way. But definitely Trott was amongst the run, the 86 coming from just 115 deliveries. Just 2 boundaries that definitely tell us about the kind of bowling he was facing and the kind of fielding, although the fielding of Sri Lanka was not good. Slipshot fielding today, the left couple of chances just slipped through, and ground fielding too. A lot was desired. But having said that, you can't take away the credit from Trott. He batted well. He ensured that England gets to a target from where the bowlers will have a chance. But in this game, that was not enough.
Well, Trott did his best. You know, he's really come through for England time after time. If you take a look at his scores through the World Cup, Mr. Consistency, comes in at the important number 3 position, sometimes number 4. Today, he surely filled the expectations of his team and captain. 86 runs, 115 balls. Interestingly, as you said, just 2 boundaries in the 86 run knock. In fact, boundaries were just so scarce for England in the first 30 overs. They had a total of 14 boundaries overall in a score of 229. But thanks to that partnership between Trott and then Ian Morgan, we were talking a little earlier, you said Ian Morgan, 50 runs, 55 balls, 4 fours and 5 lives.
It was sad because Sri Lanka is the one side that can challenge Australia and South Africa in terms of fielding. It's the only subcontinental side that can field brilliantly, and to see them drop catches today was a little surprising. But England did not have the batting to make the most of such chances. Look at Morgan, he scored 50 or 55, should have gone on to play a really big innings, and unfortunately for England got out just after making 50. They were too slow throughout the innings, and Morgan was the only one who tried, and then of course Pryor came in the end and tried a few lusty blows, but they were too slow throughout. I mean, you can be consistent, you can score your half centuries as Trott did, But essentially, you needed someone to score at a fast clip, and Morgan was the batsman who tried very hard at that.
Ian Morgan again scored a 50. He had 4 lives. He was dropped 3 times, very easy chances, and there was also an LBW decision. Look at that sitter that was missed, and the LBW decision also, the replay showed that he should have been given out. Survived, made the most of it. 50 runs. Ian Morgan, who is originally from Ireland, has played for Ireland, then turned out to be an important player for England. 50 runs, 55 balls, just 4 boundaries, but a strike rate of 90 to keep the scoreboard moving. 229 is what England were able to get, thanks to perhaps not the best fielding from the Lankans, but some pretty strong bowling. Mr. Amarnath, Malinga, Matthews, Mendes, Muralidharan. Of course, then you have Herat as well as Dilshan who can chip in. But this bowling attack compared to the other 3 semi-finals, obviously Muralidharan, 38 years old, we know about his experience. So what do you make about this potent bowling attack of Sri Lanka?
I think it's a very balanced bowling attack. They've done very well in Sri Lanka. It needs to be seen how they're going to change, if at all, the tactics when they come on to India, because that's where most of the matches are going to be played. And once you come to a different field, different environment, different conditions, how well, how fast they're going to adapt, that needs to be seen. But on paper, and what we have seen in the league stage, they have definitely a very balanced side. They don't depend on one bowler in particular, but they have quite a few bowlers who are on the given day, they can win a match for Sri Lanka. And in this game, we have seen everybody chipping in, and that's a very good indication for any team. Everybody chips in with a wicket. Everybody tries to control the flow of runs and put pressure on the batsman. I think it's a very good sign for Sri Lanka. Indeed.
You mentioned it, 5 out of the 6 bowlers picked up at least 1 wicket. You had Murli who'd pick up 2 wickets, and only Herat missed a wicket, although he was close a couple of times. But all in all, a very good effort from the Sri Lankan bowlers. We have more to discuss on this match, including the stellar innings of the openers of Sri Lanka, but right on the other side of this break here on How's That? We continue our analysis of the 4th quarterfinal here on How's That? I'm Mihir Mankad. And talking about the match today at the Premadasa Stadium, England versus Sri Lanka. England won the toss, decided to bat, and a really interesting statistic was for this ground. Only 8 times in the last 50 one-day internationals at the Premadasa Stadium in Colombo had the team batting second chased a score of 225 or more. Odds looked like they were in favor of England at this ground after the innings, until the firepower of the openers of Sri Lanka came about. Uppal Tharanga, Mr. Raman, let's talk a little bit about him. So background, in 2004, his family home was washed away in the tsunami, got called to the Indian side. Of course, we had Jayasuriya at that time who was taking that opening spot. Tharanga now has been involved in 5 double-century opening stands for Sri Lanka, including the one today. Very wily, lanky batsman, but perhaps one with tremendous potential going ahead?
Not potential. He's a proven performer, Mihir. I think potential you would use for someone who's just about starting. Someone with whose partnership with Dilshan has been solid. But what Sri Lanka has shown is that history does not matter. If teams have not been able to chase more than 225 successfully there, England did not have the firepower, they did not have the bowlers. Sri Lanka has the batting to take. I think they would have chased 300 today. They look like they were determined to do that, and they would have chased 300 if a target like that had been set. England doesn't have the bowling, and I think history really does not matter. What mattered was the present, and someone like Tharanga, very patient, did not have to hurry things up. At one point of time, he was outscoring someone who scores really at a fast clip, Dilshan, and magnificent batsman to watch. And I think there will be a threat, not just for New Zealand in the next game, but also for whoever makes it to the final between India and Pakistan.
Indeed. Uppal Tharanga and Tilakrate Dilshan were in devastating form. Not 1 wicket lost for the Sri Lankans in getting to their target. You contrast this with the English innings, and despite just 1 major partnership, the way some of those wickets crumbled, the pressure that we saw for the English innings, very, very different. Let's take a look at some of the fall of wickets of the first innings of England. And Mr. Amarnath, your analysis a little bit on perhaps bad strokes or good bowling that did most of the tricks.
I would say good bowling, because You'll only play a bad stroke when there is a pressure on you.